Hi there, my name is Bruno and I'm an astronomer. Today I would like to talk about stars, but I will start with something a bit random and then we'll get to stars. So what is this? This is a water droplet and more specifically normal light entering a water droplet. And when it does that, it has the property of splitting that white light into the 7 basic colors of the rainbow. So you have seen that before. It looks like this. This is a particularly spectacular one that I managed to capture in November 2020. And you can see that it's a full 180-degree rainbow, and it's actually a double rainbow. So there's a faint one on the side here, and this was taken at sunset. This is where the sun was setting in that direction where it's brighter. So basically, this is quite spectacular. And what does it have to do with stars? Well, we're not there yet. So basically, what this tells us is that if you have a properly made piece of glass or maybe a piece of a droplet of water in the sky, you can decompose white light into the 7 colors of the rainbow. And you've seen that before when you look at an old music CD or through a window. Sometimes it will do that if the angle is right. And basically, you split the light in order to study it. And we've made instruments called spectrograph that will allow us to actually do that. So this slide, what is different about the different colors is what we call the wavelength. So basically, it's the distance between these two peaks. It's not really interesting or important why it's like that, but basically, what you have to understand is that all the different colors, they correspond to different wavelengths or different energy. And this is just a part of what we call the electromagnetic spectrum. So this is the electromagnetic spectrum. It goes from the gamma rays to the radio wave, going through X-rays, ultraviolet, visible light, which is that very tiny, tiny part of light in the middle there, and infrared and so on. So basically, what is special about visible light is that we can see it. So let's move to a different topic now. Chemical elements, periodic table. You've all seen that before in school, and this one is slightly different because it tells us where are these elements coming from. Most of them are coming from inside stars. Some were there at the beginning, and some are made by humans, but basically it's a bunch of elements that are made of atoms, and that's how we categorize them. To give a long story short, from simple to complicated, you've got hydrogen, helium, and lithium, the first few elements, and as you go down the periodic table, you get more and more complex. So what we have here is a core of neutrons and protons that is orbited by a bunch of electrons. So we can summarize it like that. So this is what all the elements look like. And if we were to, check the composition of the sun, we know that it's mostly 70% hydrogen and 28% helium. So this is what most stars are made of, hydrogen and helium. All the rest of these heavier elements, we call them metals. That's what astronomers call these heavier elements. Let's move on. So what I said before, that stars are creating all of these elements, or most of these elements, it means that the interior of a star is a nuclear reactor. It transforms all these simple atoms into more complex atoms by nuclear fusion. When it's doing so, it releases energy in the form of electromagnetic waves. So the temperature of the surface of the star will dictate how much energy it will release in each part of the electromagnetic spectrum. So from radio to gamma rays, so we will be able to know what to expect in terms of electromagnetic radiation coming from a star by using this, this curve that is called that is predicted by the black body radiation curve. So basically, just by knowing what temperature is at the surface of a star, we are able to predict what, how much blue light or red light or radio waves or gamma rays or whatever is in the electromagnetic spectrum will be emitted by the star and potentially received by us. So when we do receive that light, you have to understand that we have our own hardware. So our eyes, they have special receptors called cones. There's 3 different types of cones, so S, M, and L, and their function is to detect colors. Some are better than others at certain colors. So the S cell cones are better at blue. The L, they are better at reddish, and the M are better at green. But basically, this is what our hardware is. This is different from a camera that we would put at the back of a telescope. It would have its own different properties, its own sensitivity to blue, red, and and so on. But our eyes, they are like that. And just to give you an idea of how we perceive color, the surface temperature of the sun is at about 5,500 Celsius, and it peaks in the green. So in the blackbody radiation curve, it would peak here in the green. But as you can see, even if the highest is in the green, there are also all the other colors there as well. And our brain will take all this color information, process it through our instrument, which is the eyes that have these cones there, and it will tell us that, hey, this thing is whitish yellow. Even though it peaks in the green, the mix of all of that processed through our instrument tells our brain that this is whitish yellow. So why is it like that? Well, that's one part I find quite interesting in there. So there's a recent study made by a physicist and a neurologist, and their conclusion was that this is a selection effect that happened something like 10 million years ago. I'm going to show you just a highlight of this study. They went to Botswana and they went to to nature there. They took many photos and of what it would look like, what it looks like then. And their hypothesis is that when the first humans started to evolve, they were probably evolving in an environment that looks like some parts of Botswana today. And basically they figured out that this kind of arrangement of cones and sensitivity of the cones and how many we have in the eye was pretty good at capturing a lot of photons or a lot of light when this is the kind of environment that you are in. And apparently this having the right kind of eyes will give us an evolutionary advantage, and it basically means that you should be able to survive in such environment. And I'm going to give you a few seconds to look at this photo and see if you are if there's any truth to that. So if you have not noticed that yet, there's a lion in this photo. I took this in Pilanesberg a couple of years ago. And if your eyes are optimized for, detection of danger of in that kind of environment, you would have spotted the lion quite early on. Yeah, it's sleeping. It's a bit tough to find, but yeah, that's the whole point of it. So let's have a little summary now. 1672, Isaac Newton is the first one who understood that you could use prism to decompose light and to recompose it back into white light. So this is when we understood that this was a property of light. Light was a composition of different colors, and it could be decomposed to look at the different colors individually. 1802, William Wollaston managed to pass sunlight through a prism, and he produced a rainbow, but he's the first one to notice that there was some, darker areas there, as if sunlight had been removed at certain precise wavelength. There were darker lines there. And a couple of years after, 1844, Joseph Fraunhofer, he cataloged 475 of these lines, and today we call these lines the Fraunhofer lines. So we identified lines also that corresponds to the light that is emitted when you sprinkle salt on top of a flame. And what does it have to do with anything? Well, remember the story about the periodic table? Table salt, that is what? That is NaCl, that's sodium chloride, two chemical elements. And when you burn it, you will affect the light that is emitted from the flame. The flame becomes yellow. You can try that at home. It's not really dangerous. Already, if you have a candle on, if you sprinkle salt on it, it's just going to change the color a little bit. So that's how the science of spectroscopy was born, with the identification of the sodium line. Pretty cool, I think. So this is a model of the hydrogen atom. Basically, you remember we have a core. Well, in the case of the hydrogen, you've got the proton at the center, and you've got one electron moving on the orbit. So it has more than one orbit, depending on the energy of the electron, and it can be at different level of orbits. And when it moves from an orbit to another, let's say from orbit number 2 to orbit number 3, so that would be from 2 to 3, the color associated to it will always be the same because it corresponds to a very specific amount of energy. And when you convert that into a wavelength, then you get, for example, going from that level to that level is the color red at 656.3 nanometers. And it will always be that color. If the electron is moving up, it will have absorbed energy from a photon, from light around, and that photon will now be destroyed, and it would move the electron up. And the same way, if the electron goes down from one level to the other, it will release that kind of energy at that color. So all of the different levels, they will all correspond to the different colors, and basically this is how we can tell that. And this can all be measured in a lab. So these are the different chemical elements. So this is those three lines that I showed you before. So red, cyan, and violet are these ones here, red, cyan, and violet. So this is for yeah, hydrogen, helium, carbon, and so on. So you imagine you've got many elements in the periodic table, and this is what we see when we do that in a lab, when we try to use these gases to see what are the absorption lines or emission lines. That's where these things are. And you know, as you go down the periodic table, you see they have many more lines at very specific colors. And if you were to take the spectrum of different known light, you would see something like that. For example, that's what daylight looks like. There's very faint dark lines there. An incandescent light, a paraffin candle, they're all looking the same. And these fluorescent we have in schools and malls and stuff, you can see that they have emission lines there. So that's why they are a bit tiring to our eyes. That blue light is tiring. And you've got all sorts of different types of light. This one is the favorite one for astronomers for street lights, because they are very discreet. They don't pollute in the whole rainbow, if you want. So they are very kind to the night sky. And this is one of the blue LED lights you see on all electronics now. And this is a red laser pointer. And you know, I would really love to show you this in person, but you know, I can't because this is pre-recorded. But fortunately for me, I've got a little handheld spectrograph like that that allows me to do this. So let me just switch to a video I recorded earlier to show you how this can be done. So I'm going to do that right now. Hello, I'm now outside. It's a very sunny day, and I've got with me my little handheld spectrograph. I'm going to basically point that in the general direction of light. I'm not going to point this directly at the sun because it is dangerous, but I will basically point that in the sky and align this with my camera and record a video of what we can see for the solar spectra. So I'm going to do this right now. So as I said before, this is the other side of the camera, and I'm going to move my little spectrograph right there, and you can see there is some spectrum being shown there. So that is what I needed to show you. I'm going to go back inside now. Hello again, and welcome to my office. This is my little experimental setup. So you see it consists mostly of a big light box that has many switches. I've got my little flexible tripod and my spectrograph of earlier. One thing I'd like to say about this spectrograph is it's not perfect. You could see from the previous light from the sun that there's a little bit of a compressed rainbow on the right. So it's because I'm just, you know, holding the spectrograph in front of my camera lens, of my cell phone camera lens. And just like I will do now, I will be putting my camera right there so that I can target these different lights. It is not perfectly centered and all, and I'm holding it with my hand, so there are internal reflections there, so it's not a perfect setup. But when we do this at a telescope, it is much better, of course. So let's have a look at what we've got. So there is the infrared light that emits mostly in the infrared, and an LED light, a modern compact fluorescent light, an old-fashioned incandescent light, another incandescent light, but this one is call this a black light, so you might have seen that in nightclubs. It makes your white clothes glow purple. And we've got these gas inside the glass tubes that will emit at very specific frequencies or wavelengths. So this is sodium, this is hydrogen, very faint and difficult to see, and this is mercury. So we will look at that, and we will also compare this to our laser light. So this is a typical laser used in astronomy. It emits a very unique wavelength of 532 nanometers. And just like the sun, when we look at laser, it's kind of dangerous for the eyes. So I had a diffuser made for it. So this is what it does. So this diffuser will have internal reflections and making the green light in a more eye-friendly thing. And for all of you who might be wondering, did I have all this instrumental setup or experimental setup made just so that I could have my own lightsaber? Well, I'd have to admit that yes, that's the sole reason I got this, is to get my own lightsaber. Okay, let's move on to getting the spectrum from these different lights. Okay, this is the incandescent bulb, so you can see it's quite similar to normal sunlight. So I'm gonna stop now and change light bulb. This is the compact fluorescent light bulb. I'm gonna zoom in a bit. Focus is quite nice here, and I'm not shaking too much. You see clearly the emission lines there. So I'm gonna go to another one now. Okay, now it's the turn for the LED light. I'm gonna approach my spectrograph here on the lens and try to align it properly. I think it's good enough now. Yeah, let me zoom in a bit so you see quite a different spectra from the others. I'm gonna switch to a new one now. This one is the infrared light, so you can see there's nothing really on the blue side, it's mostly all in the red. Let me try to zoom on this. So this is what this one looks like, and as you can see, it was that. I'm going to switch to a new one now. And now a new one. I bet you can tell which one that is. Let's zoom in here a bit. You can see it's all on the blue side. And that was this one, of course. Now we have the mercury lamp. It's a bit faint, but you can see clear emission lines there. If they can come back. Yeah, it's me moving a bit. So these are the mercury ones. Zoom in. Okay, let me show you which lamp that was. And I'm gonna switch to another one now. Okay, and now we have the sodium lamp. It's flickering a little bit, but you can really see all the different lines very nicely. Okay, still not ideal, but this is the sodium. I'm gonna try one more time to get the hydrogen. And this one is trying to focus, but it is the green laser. Try to zoom in a bit. It's only one wavelength in green. So that is it. I have not managed to do the hydrogen, it's too faint, but I think you got the idea. Okay, that's let me close this. Okay, so this is what we had for the live demonstration. And you might ask yourself, what does it have to do with stars? Well, this is a full spectrum of the sun taken with a proper instrument. You can see here the sodium lines. It's a doublet actually, so two of the sodium line. And we can compare this with other star. This is Procyon, another star in the sky, and this is Arcturus, another star. And you can see, I'm going to flick through all of them. There's already something quite different here. You can already guess by looking at this that they do not have the same chemical composition. So the different chemical elements that are present in the atmosphere of these stars has to be different because we see that there's much more absorption lines in Arcturus than in Procyon, for example. So we can actually classify stars by looking at their spectra. So this is all the way that we, different stellar types of, we give them names based on their stellar features like that. And this has to do with what are the lines that we see in these stars. And as I said before, these lines are like fingerprints, and this is where it becomes interesting. If the source is moving, it can be affected by the Doppler effect. Just like the sound frequency will change as an ambulance passes by, it will go from high pitch to low pitch. Well, light can be shifted towards the blue or the red as well. And by looking at distant galaxies, we can see that the universe is expanding. The further away a galaxy is from us, the faster it is moving away, the more the lines are shifted towards the red. So that's quite interesting. Another thing I want to show you is at the Notre Dame Observatory, we have a spectrograph, a proper one. And I had an idea back in 2019 to do an experiment. And I wanted to measure the composition of the atmosphere of Jupiter. And you might be wondering, how am I going to do that? Well, let's have a look at this. So this is, well, this is a telescope there, this is a spectrograph, and this is us trying to target Jupiter. This is a spectrum we took of the moon, and this is a spectrum that we took of a calibration lamp, a thorium-argon calibration lamp. So basically what we're doing is, with the calibration lamp, we know exactly where each line should be because we know of this chemical. We know of this. We know where such a lamp will emit its lines, so we can use this to calibrate a spectrum that we have of something that is not calibrated. So we will use one to calibrate the other. And once we've calibrated our frame, so we will take the moon, we will know exactly what wavelength corresponds to what pixel here, and we'll do the same thing for Jupiter. And by comparing the two, we would be able to tell that, if something is different in Jupiter. Why is it like that? Well, we're basically looking at sunlight. The moon is not shining, the moon is reflecting sunlight. So same as Jupiter, Jupiter is reflecting sunlight to us. So when we take a spectrum of the moon, we're basically indirectly measuring sunlight. And it's the same when we are taking a spectrum of Jupiter, or any planet for that matter. And the only difference is that Jupiter has an atmosphere, unlike the moon, which has almost no atmosphere at all. So Jupiter, with its atmosphere that has chemical elements in it, it could be that the sunlight that goes to it gets affected by whatever chemicals are inside the atmosphere, and the light that is reflected could have lost some of its photons. So if we see absorption lines there that are not present in the moon, we would know what are the chemicals that are present in Jupiter's atmosphere. So that is all I had to say today. I hope that you found this interesting, and I will see you next time.